And we are live. Switching over. Okay, we're on. Hey,
All
Matheus,
right,
thanks so
let's
much for joining
go.
me here today.
Thank you, Julian. It's a pleasure, for real.
Pleasure's all mine, man. So, real quick, Matheus, you want to give people a quick synopsis, what you're about, what you have going on?
Yeah, for sure. First of all, it's like really cool to be here. I've been seeing what you're doing, and it's pretty cool to have a platform, right? A space to talk about whatever's going on. And for those that don't know me, I always have a struggle in a bit explaining what I do. I think a lot of people that are working in this multimedia, doing a lot of stuff, feel that as well. But I don't necessarily consider myself an architect, even though I'm trained as an architect. Um, but I like to say that I make stuff. That doesn't make it less confusing, but I make stuff. And for the past 2 years, I've been the co-founder. I co-founded Sunken Blimp, which is a design studio based in Miami. We worked with many different medias, many different types of projects in virtual reality, augmented reality, digital stuff, virtual spaces, and so on, but not limited to even some physical exploration from 3D printing to eco lounging and construction in the middle of nowhere, which I think we can talk about later today. But yeah, it's kind of like exploring, right? That's kind of what I'm about.
Yeah, let's so I've seen on social media you've created some AR filters. Is that the right term for it? What you've been doing for some people, for some clients on
Yeah.
Instagram mainly? Is that right?
Yeah, not only though. So filters is one of the mediums that we can display AR, augmented reality, right? And I would kind of categorize that as augmented reality experiences or multi-reality experiences in general. Filters is just something that marketing-wise, a lot of companies view and understand the power of social media. So using this type of experience in a platform that everyone already has, there's not an extra app that you need to download. Everyone understands how a filter kind of works. So using augmented reality within those platforms makes it more accessible. And accessibility, I think it's something really important to discuss when working with these mediums because right now, for example, virtual reality, right? I have an Oculus hanging there. It's pretty cool. If you tried it, it's really cool. Perhaps technology is not there yet, but the thing is accessibility. Even if you're hosting an event that you offer it for free, anyone can jump in and use it. It's something clunky and there's a big jump from being in this reality and suddenly you're there and you kind of isolate yourself from everyone else. And also if you're doing something at home, right, that you can pull up and enter a space in your living room and be somewhere else. Sometimes you have this, in virtual reality, it's not everyone has a headset, so including more people and offering experiences that are more accessible, that becomes an issue. And then filter, what we discovered is that anyone, we're carrying those in our pockets day in, day out. Everyone checks in Instagram, not everyone, but like checks in Instagram at least once a day. So allowing for a company, a brand, or an organization, whatever it is, to display information or enter a space in this accessible way that in less than 15 seconds, it can be exploring a whole different environment. That's something that was interesting to us. And that's what we started doing.
It's almost like you could do a pop up, a little marketing campaign for anybody and involve anybody else, right? And it ends up becoming this community thing where people can create their own content around an initiative that one organization has.
For sure, for sure. And pop-ups, right? We understand that a pop-up has a lot of strength and power in a marketing campaign. Installations, right? Especially in architecture school, we learn about an installation or making a pavilion, we understand how cool we can be as an exploration that is not necessarily a full building, but it's something temporary, doing something like that. And in physical terms, there's always a lot of limitations, which anything in life has its own limitations. But it's very interesting to think that something like this that is virtual, not only you have the geolocation freedom, right? That you can have a pop-up or an installation anywhere. Someone can open up in the living room or at the beach or in the big shopping mall, but also the time and efficiency of something like that, the reach that you can have is a completely different, spectrum. Right now, we worked on a campaign for an artist from Atlantic Records, Melanie Martinez, and it was kind of insane how well their community received it. In the first, I believe, 10 days, we had over 500,000 people enter the space.
Wow.
You know, that's something that if you put in perspective of building a really nice installation, you know, physical, making everything, when are you gonna get, you know, 500,000 people to go through it is really complicated. And then we have people, you know, we have the metrics of the cities, the top cities that people entered this from, and it goes all the way from like all the way Latin America, Europe, Asia. People were going into the space we created from everywhere. I think that goes to show the reach that you can have and the other side of the spectrum. Yeah, maybe you cannot touch it, but you can still deliver a message and maximize the message that is sent.
It really I know the metaverse has died down a little bit in hype at this point in time, but that's kind of what it starts pointing to me, pointing at for me is especially for the topics that you're hosting in on these virtual environments and these live discussions that you do. There's a huge educational component there. Like you making so much knowledge, so many people, so many tools accessible to those that maybe in their immediate surroundings or even just within their reach, they can't really access these type of experiences or that type of knowledge or those type of interactions, which is, you know, incredibly valuable. It's like this underlying layer that we can all tap into to connect with anybody else in the world, which is what we've been doing with the internet. But this just brings it, I guess, to a whole other experiential level, right?
For sure. And I agree with what you said. You know, the metaverse kind of died down. And from the beginning, you know, even we don't need to get into like metaverse per se. Metaverse is an idea, right? It's not a specific thing, it's a
Right.
vision. And it fell out of public discourse, I would say. It was very hyped for a second, you know, and people that don't know what that is were like, yeah, that's the future. Um, but we're still marching towards a digital, you know, presence. For example, we're having this conversation over a digital platform, you know, we're
Right.
talking on a box and people are viewing this from YouTube and this is going to be transformed into perhaps little reels or TikToks, whatever. We're using a digital platform in order to transfer a message or to have a conversation or to introduce a new idea, whatever it is. Now, when we have the opportunity of being immersed in a space where we're having these things digitally as well, thinking about reach, thinking about accessibility, you know, the transfer of information, those are interesting tools. So what we started doing when you mentioned education, over a year ago, we created a stage in a virtual platform where we would invite people to talk about what they're doing with their lives, you know, similar as this. And we wanted to create a stage where you can showcase not only images, videos, kind of set up like a gallery with whatever work you would like to show, but also 3D models. So when we're talking to people that are in design or in concrete molding, instead of just showing videos and pictures like you're sharing a screen or presenting a PowerPoint, you can actually go around and take the mold and explain why this is such an issue in the beginning because the mold sticks to the thing. So you created this one detail that allows for the air to go in for you to remove the mold, you know? So that little
Right.
change of you being able to showcase something and scale really big so everyone can go inside the model and visualize what you're talking about. Those are tools that they're not the future, they're here, right? We can use them. So we wanted to explore that. And then the question from the architectural design standpoint is how do you design a stage where gravity is not that important? You know, it could be anything. There's no building code, you know, there's no one coming there with like, hey, is this ramp ADA compliant? You know,
Yeah.
so out of this perceived no regulations, right? You can do anything. What is the most optimal way to create a space for education, to create a space that people are interested about something, even in the 21st century idea that attention span is the size of a raisin? You know, how do you create a space where people can go around for 20 minutes getting a lecture, but not feeling like you have to sit down, sit tight, and be so type of type of feeling? So a year ago, we opened the stage and started the first what we call Dive Lives, which is this educational lecture every Wednesday. And then we started taking in feedback from the community, people that were going around to understand, hey, where do people like to stand to watch a presentation? Where do they walk when they're hearing someone talk? How do speakers like to show 3D models? Where do they organize the pictures and videos? And we started taking those comments, feedback, and perceptions that we had, and we started updating the stage. That's the good thing about a virtual world as well, right? You can do renovations without having to close it down or anything. So we started modifying and modifying and modifying. And then now we are at the variation, I think like 8 or 9 of the stage. So a lot has changed, but it's always getting more and more optimized for this virtual education type of environment.
Wow, I mean, that's incredibly powerful, especially the analytics of it, as you're pointing out. What is the most optimal way to present this? And I suppose, are there ties to the physical? I mean, obviously, there are ties to how we experience things in the physical, how we're used to being in a classroom, how we're used to listening to lectures that transfer over to digital, but then that immense freedom that you have, it's unreal. There's a really interesting thread there too, which both of us, I think, we're stepping out a little bit from architecture. And I mean, at least like on my end, a lot of the people I'm around are people that got into architecture thinking it was a very artistic or creative field, which it can be. But in the United States, most of the time, perhaps not. It can be more of a technical profession or more so of an administrative thing, right? You're facilitating the construction or the development, and you're creating more of a product, right? You're repeating or iterating on a product rather than delivering a custom service or delivering something like what you're describing, unless you're involved in those public works, in those theaters, in those parks, right? And all these
Mhm.
platforms for public forum, essentially, right? What all those big projects are. So I guess my question here is, or what I'm trying to point towards is, we see a lot of architectural courses, especially around software like Maya or Blender, and a lot of these courses or a lot of these resources being offered to architecture students, they're not going to be utilized really unless they go to a crazy design firm that does that, unique like jewel of a building once every couple of years, or you start creating virtual worlds, right? So it's, how do you see that playing out a little bit? Do you think architecture sort of, I mean, it's a wide-ranging career, wide-ranging discipline, but do you think we might see a harsh shift there where we actually have, or we see people that are studying architecture going to education for architecture to really just build virtual worlds because that ends up being a more artistic or creative route?
So first of all, I believe architecture is kind of like the Joker of careers in a way. I think there's only positive things that you can get from an architecture education if you're into this creative, whatever it is. Um, it teaches you many skills, as you're well aware. If anyone's interested in like learning more about like why should I take architecture, there's so many things that you learn from, even the idea of photography composition to, you know, colors, the range is immense. And I agree, that's something that I discovered on my own path in architecture is what is the actual architectural presence. Does that really align with what I want to do in the world? And I had a early exposure to architecture even before college because my parents are architects, my grandparents are architects, my aunts, my sister, so I kind of came up from a nest of architects. So I saw it from early on. Um, but even though I still love it, and honestly, I get super excited about architectural stuff, I'm kind of like an architectural geek. There's a few things internally that I felt like I could explore a little bit if I push the boundaries outside, and then from outside try to pull in, the stuff that I learned in architecture school and in the architectural practice. In regards to what architects are using in the future for creative being, absolutely the same way that people that work in stage design, some people went through architecture and work in stage design, which is a whole different set of regulations, rules, and tool sets, but nonetheless using what you learned within architecture. And if anyone is in architecture working in Revit for buildings, etc., and want to explore more the creative side, there's always like all of these different routes to tap into that don't necessarily derail your career, but you start working with, right, from art to hey, you can create a virtual space, a virtual building for that. I mean, even if you completely forget what's going on with like virtual spaces and the idea of the metaverse, whatever it is, but video games, hey, like the entertainment industry, if you look at the amount of money put into video games every year, it's insane. And it is people exploring virtual worlds, whatever type of video game it is a virtual type of environment. Even if it's a 2D video game, it's an environment, and there is a design behind it. So, the limitations, the ceiling is like really high. You can really explore and try out different things. But yeah, I don't think I don't not necessarily everyone's gonna go into digital building, but the opportunities within this industry are growing every day.
Right, that's kind of what I'm thinking at is where it seems like we're talking about something incredibly futuristic, but you're capitalizing on this greatly. And I think companies are starting to realize, you hear about, I think it was Walt Disney that shut down their metaverse division and laid off a bunch of people. I forget if it was, yeah, it had, I think it was pretty sure it was Walt Disney. But there's tremendous opportunity there. I imagine that this is still, as you're mentioning, growing, but also emerging, right? Like people are still waking up to, people are still waking up to how to use social media for their business, right? So
For sure.
it's a trending thing. Yeah. There was also a really good point there you made with the video game aspect. Like there's so much technology that has been developed, software and hardware, around entertainment, right? Primarily, well, with video games or with movies, when it comes to the more technical things that we're talking about, those actual tools, those actual pieces of software and hardware that make those things happen. But it's the creativity behind the people on, okay, how do we take this now and amplify it or bring it to a crowd that isn't into video games or isn't into, Marvel movies or that type of thing, right? How would you suggest, for example, someone maybe already in an industry or wanting to dive into the industry of creating these 3D assets for companies, are there any sort of revelations that you had along the way that made you realize, like, oh, okay, like not only is this a thing, like is there actual value here that I can execute on, but I can actually bring this to these specific people, or was there any moment there where, like, what made you really like dive in and think like, okay, if I acquire these skills or if I develop these products or these experiences, like these people will see value? Like, did you demonstrate that for yourself in a way beforehand before bringing it to others, or yeah, I'll let you kind of take it from there.
So I started doing what I'm doing. It wasn't out of, a marketing meeting or this analytics of like, hey, the world is shifting this way, therefore let me offer these type of services. Everything that I've done to date, even within the company, has been a result of I really like this, like I'm gonna do this because it keeps me up, and I'm excited about something, so I start investigating and learning how to do a specific thing. It's almost like playground type of environment, and then sharing on social media. That's actually how Sunka came to be. I when I was still in school, I was doing experiments and testing out my own stuff, especially like during COVID, right? When everyone was watching like Tiger King or whatever, I was in my room kind of 3D modeling, 3D printing stuff so I could hold my phone in a specific position in the shower so I could
Right.
amplify the sounds of my phone speakers. And then I would post it, and I would experiment with something else and I would post it. And then some people started finding value in this idea of exploration, right? That doing crazy stuff for the sake of being crazy. Um, and that's what kind of attracted my co-founder, my partner that is working with me now on Sunken Blimp. We co-founded Sunken Blimp because he had a project in mind regarding a greenhouse in Sri Lanka. And he was like, hey, I have a project in mind. Do you want to do a Zoom meeting? Like a random DM, because of social media. I think he searched hashtag architecture
Hmm.
on Instagram or TikTok, and then he found a video, and then we started discussing. We ended up doing this project together. And then, in the meetings about this project and all, we started talking about our visions of the world and the future and the idea of design. And then Sunken Blimp came to be as an exploratory studio. But for anyone interested in kind of jumping into something like this, or kind of following the world, I would say it's kind of flipped sometimes. It's not just look at how the world is going and try to catch up. It's kind of like do something that you think, it's not there, it's not in anyone's perspective yet, that you find interesting, and the world can sometimes like, close the gap. um I think, of course, there's cases and cases. It's not just like close your eyes, put yourself in a hole for 2 years and see what happens. But I think if I wasn't as excited about what I'm doing, I definitely wouldn't be here. I would have, I don't know, given up or try to follow, every news. Like, oh my God. For example, the idea of like Disney's closing the metaverse department or whatever, people would be like, oh my God. But what I'm doing is not necessarily pushing, hey guys, join the metaverse, whatever. I'm creating spaces, experiences, um, depending on they're very project specific, right? I don't even talk about the metaverse anymore, or like, because it's not really even my field of view. We're shifting, and that's the good thing about having an interdisciplinary studio or something. It's because every project is a new challenge, and I love a good challenge. So most of the projects, like 50% of the knowledge is acquired during the process, because we're exploring something completely new, completely different. And I think that's what excites me. This ends up making sure that every project is innovating itself. We don't copy and paste. So everything is kind of marching forward. How many more technologies can we use? How can we push this boundary a little further? That's I think that's exciting. I don't know.
It's incredibly exciting, man, and it's so it hits me when it's like you're really just going in on yourself, right? You're betting on yourself, you're betting on your own crazy, on your own creativity. You're going in full in, authentic, genuine, what you're interested in, and really practicing it, exercising it. And then it just happens to resonate. It happens to, there's an opportunity or there's a trend, there's whatever's going on with the world externally. There's a link, there's a connection that can happen, and then that just amplifies what was already going on with you, right? Essentially.
For sure, for sure. And it's really helpful to have a powerful and equally as eager team with you. For example, I'm very thankful for my team, and we are all young and kind of hungry for this type of let's do something crazy. Um, and it's a combination of, we have graphic designers and 3D modelers, developers, AR developers, VR developers, etc. And it's really interesting because all these conversations, they kind of always start off with a base of like, okay, what can we do next? What can we do um, different? I think none of us are complacent in a way. So there's always this push and pull of like, okay, let's make it better, let's make it better. Um, and it makes it fun. That's the whole thing. Because once you get into the, I wouldn't even say corporate, right? But the kind of top down,
The
way
business
of,
development. At some point, it's got to
yeah.
stop being a hobby and a creative outlet, and it's got to actually be a
For
business or
sure,
a
for sure.
profession, right?
And I mean, this is professional, right? We're 9 to 5 with a full team that works full time, um, every day doing each of these projects. And of course, there's structure. It's not a mess,
Right.
like everyone coming to the room whenever, but nonetheless, it feels like it's a organized playground, right? And that's something that I never, in architecture school, for example, you don't learn how to manage a team, how to manage a company. You do a couple of group projects, but that's about it, right? That's
And
something that, one, I'm incredibly grateful for my co-founder, who's like very experienced in venture and company, being like CEO, CFO in other companies. So that's a lot of the learning experience that I went through. But a lot of it was also, hey, what if we try this, right? I feel like not not following what other studios or other companies are doing and starting from scratch is also a great way to see what works, what doesn't. And that creates a culture, right? Because every studio, every company has its own work culture and development culture, whatever it is. So why not try something perhaps new, something different, see if it lands and sticks, and build on it.
that's a great point. Yeah. And it really sounds like the culture that you're building or the way that you're operating is really personal to your values as well. Not just as a person, but as a designer, right? As a designer, we all hold different values that we exercise on, right? Or that we act on. Um, I wanted to ask in terms of Well, there's just so many points that popped into my head with what you last said, but I'm kind of thinking back a little bit to our architectural education because that's where we met, and we were at different points in our. I believe I was like I was doing a post grad, I was doing a second master's while working full time, right? And you were like in your second year for
Yes.
undergrad.
Yeah, that's right. And I remember, okay, so I knew who you were, right? Because we had talked a couple of times, and you were working like on cool stuff at the labs. And I think it was this one summer, one of my friends told me, "Hey, you know, there's this thing going on this summer. They're looking for volunteers to work on a project. Are you interested?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure. You know, it's my second year. I'm doing nothing over the summer except a couple of like random courses that you need to go through, like
Right.
physics or something." And I was like, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So we ended up talking. And the project was the RDF lab, which is the robotics and digital fabrication lab. They just had gotten a huge grant for robots, right? And they got robots and new equipment. They were going to open up this entire new lab. And for that, we needed some test projects like, hey, here's a robot, you know, an industrial car making robot, figure it out, right? And then we ended up spending the entire summer in this tiny room, this cubicle, learning how to use this big monster robot. And that was so cool. And honestly, dude, like to be completely honest, that's a big part of what spiked my hunger for exploration. Because at that time, right, we were working on, you know, house projects. You know, we were gonna go to Savannah later, and that's like part of their architectural design, right? And we're talking about Le Corbusier's influence and like big windows and stuff. And then meanwhile, I spent a whole summer with a robot trying to 3D print ceramic and make this like parametric wall. And I liked that feeling of it's uncharted territory, you know? There's not a lot of precedents of people that try something like that, and trying to make something out of it felt so good. And that's how we met, and then we started working with this, and afterwards, I ended up getting a job at the RDF, making other cool, crazy projects, and I like to have always new things to do, shifting completely every now and then and building up the archive of tools and knowledge that you can get from these projects. So yeah, honestly, thank you. Thank you for that.
Thank you for volunteering. Are you kidding me? Yeah, that was an interesting experience. It seems like it was almost a past life in a way, but still very, very much connected to where we are today. Absolutely. And it comes back around to this point we're sort of dancing around is really architecture. The big benefit, at least the way I see it, is it's an education in deconstructing the world so that you
Mhm.
can then build your own, right? In a way. Because, yeah, going into architecture school, you should know how to draw. You know, you don't need to have, you don't have to have been bred for it, right? With your parents indoctrinating you into it or whatever.
Oh my God, I was bred for it. That is a way of putting it. That's a way of putting it.
No, but I mean, obviously that puts you probably already came in with that framework, right? Or that way of thinking
Mhm.
just because you were around it all the time. I feel like I came in with that a little bit. I knew how to draw. I was coming more from an artist background going into architecture. A lot of people that may go into it nowadays, or just because schools are growing in size and um, there's more schools, there's always more schools, and they're taking on more and more students. A lot of students going into architecture, they don't know how to draw maybe well or sketch, right? Or they don't have this understanding, or they don't, there's these tools that we use to deconstruct or analyze our environment. It could be photography, sketching, writing, Google Maps or Google Earth. Right? That's a big one to learn about cities and different cultures and different organizations or different ways that people organize themselves in their day-to-day lives. But that way of thinking, that state of mind of like always being present and observant even to the nuances around you, and kind of seeing how it all, every little thing plays a bigger role.
Mhm.
It's, I think that's a main thread or theme, at least how I'm seeing it in architecture. I think it transfers back to the robotics thing, where it's like we were making incremental progress every day, where it was kind of like we would maybe spend 4 hours one day just fixing this one line of code that was giving an error. We didn't understand why. And it was just digging through forums and testing different solutions until we find it. And we feel like, all right, we did that. Bye. See you tomorrow. But then, like 2, 3 weeks later, turns out our clay prints off of this robotic arm were just getting incrementally better week after week, just spending that diligence and really getting into the nuance of things. It's a fascinating thing, and I I think back sometimes to the times where architects would live in your house to study how you lived, right? What's your morning
Wait,
routine? What's your
that's a
nightly
thing?
routine, and design a house around that. I wish the economics today could play so that we could actually continue doing that, but maybe in some future.
Yeah. Um, out of everything, right? Nonetheless, if you think about architecture, it's just like the design of the environment around us, in a way, kind of conceptualizing and then executing the infrastructure that makes it like the shell where we live in a way. And I think that's why it's so applicable in different fields and so applicable in different, circumstances and projects, because everything we do, we're interacting with the world. It's kind of like helping make up the world that we involve ourselves with. Um, of course, that it can go all the way to like building a house, building an apartment, building a shopping mall. But if you decide to paint a wall, it changes the environment that you're in. If you decide to move to a different place, that is you changing your environment. If you decide to litter versus not litter, you're subconsciously, like modifying the environment that we are all living in. So it's of course that it's not like for you to be legally an architect in the US, you need to have a license, all of that. But we are all in a way architecturing our lives constantly, and the world kind of like society changes the environment as we go. I feel like it's really important to tap into that mentality when working and creating spaces, creating experiences, because people will change their environments regardless, right? And I think it's above all very important to understand who you're working with and who this is for. Of course, you're not going to live in someone's house to understand what they're doing, but there's other ways of keeping an eye open and being present, and testing out and seeing how people respond to things in general. And that applies to so many things. I'm being vague, yes, because this applies to so many things. But for example, we're doing a project right now, right? And the whole thing is the generation on top of the project, they're not necessarily the generation that they're trying to target. So they looked for someone that, hey, can you speak to this generation, right? And that is an interesting fact to, hey, like, yes, we are immersed in this generation's culture, therefore we can understand what they want. But to make a project that is for someone that understands they don't know about this generation's needs, and that is the really cool thing, because if you talk about like social media, the TikTok culture, whatever it is an ever evolving idea, and a video that would be very successful a year ago would not received any views today, because it's kind of always evolving. So how do you stay accurate? How do you stay current within today's culture? And I feel like the only way is like be on it, like not endless scrolling, but be part of this discourse, right? Post yourself, for example. Then you're able to kind of mitigate through it. I'm not necessarily sure where the conversation is leading to, but like if we're talking about like architecture per se or any of these things. But an example that I'd like to share is the one of our latest projects. We published it in February, and it was the filter of the Serendipity Furniture shop at the beach, and that was the first augmented reality project that we kind of announced, big scale on all social medias and all, and that got a really good response. Um, in a way, it was kind of like this portal that you're on the beach and you can open your phone, visualize the store, walk in, see the products, walk out, and within the first week and a half or so, at some point, we just looked at social media. It was like a 2 million views out of the blue. And then throughout the day, by the end of the day, it was at 4 million. The next day, it got published at the Daily Mail and a couple of
Wow.
different like news articles. And by the end of the week, it was at 12 million, right? So this was, anyone that sees it like, oh my God, overnight, whatever, whatever. But we've been working on this discourse and thinking, hey, how can we make these spaces more accessible? How can we make this more engaging and more interesting culture wise or experience wise and try different things? So in the end, this is not only a result of trying different things and exploring, but also to listen to how people respond to the designs we have done in the past and reiterate, reiterate, reiterate. So now we're creating these projects for all sorts of clients, right? That want to tap into that idea of accessibility and responding to one generation's culture and so on. So I think that's the interesting point of viewing a studio as an exploration studio, because you're never bound to your own designs, your own capabilities. Like our pitch deck for like new clients, our intro conversation has so many different things, right? And I designed it to be like that. And I want to shatter your box of what could be possible, what is not. And part of the pitch deck is talking about things that we haven't done yet, but would be cool. But you know, it's kind of like a mosaic of anything is possible, and no matter what it is, we're down to try it out. I think that's the mentality that I personally have. That's the mentality that talking with my team, we're all in understanding with. And that's kind of the message that I want to share whenever we're talking to a potential new client or something like that. Like, hey, whatever you can possibly think of, we'll find a way of getting it done, and we try it out and we'll have fun in the process.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's amazing, dude. That's awesome. It's and as far as like where this conversation is going, it can go wherever, because at the end of the day, the stuff we're talking about here, we're really at the root of, I think, where we overlap too very nicely, is this creative thinking, critical thinking. There's this point where you learn this process in school, and it's more about transferring that to more practical applications and filtering out what are the things that we need to kind of keep and what do we need to sort of like forget or like adopt newly. Something that keeps popping into my mind is we learn this process of studying a site or studying a place and its people, and then coming up with a concept, developing that concept. But really, I mean, the main things that from the education standpoint that I really took away was the technical abilities. It's all the free time I had to explore all these different options, all these different tools, all these different creative processes that I could have. And it really wasn't until, for me, when I started speaking to potential clients and doing that over and over and over again and embarrassing myself over and over and over again, that you actually come to understand what other people care about and what you should be studying and what concepts should look like. Because in reality, the studies that, at least from my point of view, the way that we were studying potential architectural projects in school and the way we were coming up with concepts was not productive or fruitful most of the time. I won't say like all the time or like at all. But, it's, for example, in a city like Miami, just because that's where we went to school, we studied all these things about sight that Miami just doesn't care about, because everyone drives with a car. Everyone's willing to, everything's just an isolated satellite that's either an hour away or 20 minutes away, right? So a lot of these aspects of, yeah, it's important to know who's here and the history of this place, and it's important to know all of those things. But when it comes to actually providing a solution to a problem, which is in my eyes what design is, a lot of that information isn't conducive, right? So you're just kind of like, you're gathering all these things, kind of just shooting in the dark, when really what I would have loved to have done more in school, at least, would have been to just call people randomly. Like that card of, I use this a lot more when I graduated.
Yes.
The whole, hey, I'm an architecture student, I'm doing research. I continued to use that like after I
I
had
do that all
graduated
the
for a
time,
while.
especially trying to get into places that I'm not allowed to get into. Like like I'm on vacation or something and I'm in a church, like a really nice church, and there's like, there's a security guard that doesn't allow going to the balcony. I'm like, I'm an architecture student. I really like to see, and I'm honestly interested in seeing the architectural side of things. But I use that all the time to get into places, and people are usually like, yeah, go for it.
Yeah.
But also talking to people like, I love information on this. And yeah, man, absolutely. Gathering information about one's like location site, I honestly got a whole different perspective after working, with some of these projects because now even information that let's say I cannot get from ArcGIS or weather data from a location, you can go and capture it yourself,
Yeah.
right? You can go immerse yourself in a specific project. Of course, depending on the project, right? But the one that we're doing right now, which is our personal child, which is called the Sanctuary, that's one of the most exciting projects that we're doing right now. And the Sanctuary, just to like sum it up really quick, is the idea of what if we could get a place in the middle of nowhere and experiment with living off the grid, but also, experimenting with designs that are not possible anywhere else. And last year, we were able to acquire a little piece of land in the middle of nowhere in one of the few counties in the US where the building code doesn't really apply, which is like, it's every architect's dreams, right? And the idea is to create this housing or some sort of, space that you can survive, right? It provides its own water, provides its own electricity. You're completely off the grid and trying things that would be really cool. So after we got this recently this year, we went to the sanctuary, to the location, and we did our first installation, which is a simple weather measuring device connected to solar panels and batteries and a live camera and Wi-Fi connection. So now in the middle of nowhere, you can access Wi-Fi, but also you can right now go live and see the cameras, visualize what's going on, and it's tracking the weather patterns, wind direction, solar intensity, all of these precipitation, humidity, all of these things that are really important for you to figure out what is the design, what is the orientation, everything about a project. But if we couldn't get that information, we're recording it now,
Right.
so in a few months we're going to have a whole set of patterns, weather patterns that we can use towards building that, in school, if you couldn't do it, you would probably fake it in a nearby place. um but yeah, I think understanding the understanding what you're working with, it's it goes without saying, it's really important, but you have a whole different set of tools that you can utilize once you're out of this school mentality.
Yeah. It's this thing where maybe like people are I mean generally people are afraid to fail, right? And that's something we all want to overcome if we want to grow, if we want to progress. And it's that thing where I was bringing up, the architecture. I'm an architecture student thing because you could just call people up. Like, imagine calling people in the city up and knowing the right questions, being like, hey, what's the main reason you turn away projects from architects that submit to you? That is like so important to know. And it's not something a lot of uh, people around you in an academic setting or point would have. And it's with the point that you're putting out, like it takes a year or two to put out sensors into place and get all the real data that you need in order to actually act on versus assuming all that information from whatever you can get it from, right? Because ultimately that's not as useful. But this point on the sanctuary is really interesting. I'd love to know because we've talked about this a little bit, and I understand what you're doing in terms of like building this. But what spurred that? Was this more something that came from internally from you that you'd like to see brought about into the world? Is it kind of like that same process that you had where I'm into this, I'm going to go ahead and do it. Other people are probably into it. I'll go ahead and share it. Or was there like an external input that kind of pointed you towards starting that initiative?
So this is something that my other co-founder and I, we both share this vision for exploring, and it falls more into something that like we think it's pretty cool, therefore we're gonna go and do it. And that's something for us, right? It's for experimentation and learning new things and pushing what we can do. Because it's only until you try to make a house in the middle of nowhere that is completely off the grid that you're gonna learn what are the requirements for it. And yeah, I'm reading a lot of literature on it, especially the earthships and houses in the 60s and 70s that were built, thinking of these solutions. But nonetheless, now we're working with a completely different set of manufacturing capabilities and um like resources that we didn't before. For example, even the sanctuary, I use so much chat GPT to figure out stuff that I didn't know. Even like what is the angle and whatever. Like this is my battery, this is my equipment. What type of how much energy do I need? What is the angle of the solar panel and what battery would I need to support the system? And I was able, we together were able to get a lot of these answers by using all of these tools that we didn't before, versus, I'm no solar engineer, you know like maybe we did actually speak to a friend of ours who was a solar engineer and helped figuring out some of the equipment, but nonetheless, a lot of this installation process were done by two people that couldn't, and it came from really this hunger for exploration, and the projects that we do as a company provide the resources that we need to self-fund this project, and this is a long term type of project. And in the beginning we created Sunken Blimp as a community, so if anyone has ideas or crazy suggestions for what would be cool, this is a place where we can actually act upon the crazy ideas that come from the community. People that come to Dive Lives, they usually hang around afterwards and we talk about random stuff. One time I met Kevin, one of the people that, come to almost all of Dive Lives. And he is also, he's not in architecture, but he is in other departments, especially with biology and computer science, all of that. And he was growing mushrooms in his own house. Not the fun ones, the
No, the
actual,
ones you make surfboards out of.
yeah, exactly. And he was growing to experiment with 3D printing them, to 3D print with mushroom components that would then grow,
Wow.
And then after these conversations, I actually got some of the same mushrooms that he uses, and I'm growing my own to try out different things. And
Oof.
then the conversation started, what if we do furniture or lamps, that grow itself and grow throughout time. So conversations led to this. And that's why we wanted to create platforms and spaces for conversation to run, but also resources that we can act upon, like the sanctuary.
Man, that's such a it's really tapping into that fourth dimension that architecture can do, right? Really thinking about how is the architecture going to evolve, how is it going to change, and at this point with the insight or the knowledge that we have now, how can we grow architecture, right? Or how can we grow spaces? It's really fascinating. That's a whole thread on its own. Very
For
cool,
sure.
man. Well, hey, anything that we want to bring up? Closing thoughts, closing remarks. I mean, you've talked a little bit there with the sanctuary, what's in front of you right now. I know you've got a ton of projects and you've mentioned a lot of the ones that you just closed out, but yeah, anything you'd want to tap into in closing?
Well, I'd like first thank you for this conversation. And I feel like I've had a couple of these type of conversations that we showcase what's going on, and every time I talk to someone about this, it has changed so much, it's always, you never know what's next in a way, in a good way, right? It's not like I don't know what's going on tomorrow, but you don't know what the next 6 months could hold in terms of exciting projects and opportunities. And it's something to that I look forward to, the unknown. I look forward to not knowing, and being really excited about pushing the limits. So I definitely commend anyone that is interested in exploration, interested in doing something completely different for trying. Do it. Reach out. If you have a crazy something in mind that you would like to test it out, like let's talk, come to one of the conversations. Send a DM. You don't know the power of a cold email. Sometimes people respond to those. And yeah, let's build something cool together.
That's awesome, man. That's so great. And no, I want to thank you sincerely for coming on and talking to me. I mean, it's been quite a journey. I feel like time has flown, but I'm incredibly grateful to have seen or like had a front row seat as some of your process and to be able to catch up with you on what you're doing now. And I hope we'll do it again. I mean, if we talk again in the future, which I'm sure that we will, I'm fascinated to see what the conversation might look like. Then you might be like, hey, we ended up doing 100, like a total 180. Now everything starts with a physical location, and then we
Yeah, man. Maybe the next conversation is gonna be live in the
yeah.
sanctuary. Who knows?
Yes, yes. We talked about that, doing one in person. Yeah. Actually, there's someone popped that question into the chat is if you're still doing phygital spaces. I remember you were bringing on that point at one time of, I mean, the AR aspect includes that, but I suppose it's a case-by-case basis, or it's situational or circumstantial, right? Whether you have
Yeah.
a physical and
But we
digital
are.
combined in one, right?
But we are, and it's really interesting. But we are working on a lot of projects actually that do deal with the physical element and digital combined. Not only using augmented reality, but for anyone that has seen some of the explorations that we've done in the past, using projection mapping that tracks the user, so it responds to, proximity, responds to perceived perspective, all of that. I am so into that stuff. Yeah, I have no idea. um, and and the thing is, like, there's not that much documentation on this type of stuff. A lot of the experiments that we're doing is kind of like, let's try it out and let's figure it out. So that's something that is always in the works, even behind the scenes, even when it's not related to a project. We're doing that internally to experiment and push and learn. So there's actually a project coming up that, we'll be able to disclose more of this stuff. But yeah, Phygital, I get super excited about that. I think there's a lot of room for us to integrate things like that. Even Meta is pushing a lot of um I'm not sure if anyone has seen it, but as of this week, they had a announcement that they're pushing advertisement in augmented reality, for example. So the idea that, you know, you can have a billboard next to a road and then you see something, but if you're having, this type of experience, now you can do advertisement in augmented reality, stuff like that, which brings the whole set of questions. We don't need to talk about Meta. I'm not saying I agree with a lot of this stuff, but nonetheless, these are tools that are becoming mainstream and allows you to explore how to use them for what you value, right? What are your values within the capabilities of new platforms and new tools? That's what's interesting, right? But yeah, Phygital all the way. Let's go.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, again, thanks so much for coming on. This is a fantastic conversation, dude. I got so much out of it. I'm sure. I mean, I'm peeking at the chat over here every once in a while. People are stoked. They're loving it. So,
Oh, nice.
yeah, man. Again, thanks so much for coming on. I'm sure we'll do this again. We'll set it up, and yeah, we'll close out there.
Let's go. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Matheus.
Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I don't know. Closing with a McDonald's jingle, because why not?
Yeah, right. And we're out. So, yeah, thanks everyone for dropping in. This has been fantastic. If you'd like to see more conversations or just more creative development content, that's what I try to do here on this channel. Definitely give Matheus a follow, his company as well, The Sunken Blimp. Where's the best place where they can find you, Matheus?
Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube coming soon, but I'm not going to talk too much about that. But yeah, that'll be fine.
Okay. Well, there you have it. Follow up. We'll be back. And cheers, everyone. Have a great rest of your Monday. This is going to be a kick-ass week for everybody.